Now, the last thing on the user interface is how we change the sign out to be sign out or to be sign in. Now, obviously the default is sign out. And you can see when we have some text here, which means it's out, then the default becomes sign in. Of course, this is the same idea of linking to the form. And to link to the form, first we need to go look at the form. Let's review very quickly the key aspects of our build, which is we have some data that we call a kind of database, and we have a form that the users are going to use to input information, and we have the user interface. Remember that the user interface will draw data from the database to show what's available, what's not available, and the form will be used to put information into the database. And this can include, in our case, the check-in and the check-out data, and what the ID of the equipment that's being checked in or checked out is. Of course, this will then update the user interface so that this is always current. So now we need to have the form. And how do we get to the form? Well, we have the button that sign in, sign out is going to take us to the form. That's easy enough, but we also want to pre-fill the form. We want to have things like the ID of the equipment. We want to maybe have the name of the equipment. We don't want the user to put that in because they might put it in wrong, which would cause even more confusion. So we're going to go ahead and look at the form now. This bit here. We did look at the form earlier, but just a reminder, you can make your forms very interesting and attractive, and this is the real upside, the positive part of this process. Anybody can change these forms, change spelling mistakes, writing mistakes, graphics, update them without knowing any code or changing anything in the underlying structure of the system. You can see we have a number of questions here, most importantly about the equipment name and the equipment number, and if the equipment's to be checked out or not. Okay, so let's come over to our user area here. Okay, let's look at the formula that we're using here. We're going to begin right here at the beginning with array formula. Now we've seen this before. And what does this help us do? This helps us to make an array so that in the A column, we can write the code here once. Then it will fill in the rest. You don't need to write it every time. You don't need that. It'll just go all the way down because it's an array formula, so it makes an array. That array formula is the outside parentheses right here. That's array formula. Next, inside of here, we have an if. So the if is going to go all the way over to here. So we're going to say this is an array formula. Then here is the if. And remember, the if has a test, a conditional test, and then what to do if it's true and what to do if it's false. So let's look here at the test. The test is E4 all the way to E. So E4, let's come back and look at what E4 is. E4 is the in or out status. So it's the current status. It's going to say in or it's going to say out. If this is in, then we're going to do something. And if it's not in, we're going to do something else. What's interesting here is we have E4 all the way to E. And why do we say E4 to E? Because again, we're using the array. So we want to test the E column. And we want to begin at E4 because this code is all beginning in 4. You see here, 4 is our first row, 4. We want to begin at 4, and then we want to go all the way down. So this little bit here, E4 to E, also matches the array. So the array goes all the way down like this. So we don't need to write, again, we don't need to write the code each time. We can just write it one time, and the array formula will make it go all the way down. As long as we write the matching data inside correctly, which is we begin at E4, go all the way down to E. Okay, so we're going to test. Is it in? So if it's in, then we're going to do something. What are we going to do? We're going to show a hyperlink. Now remember the way hyperlink works? You need to have the code for the URL, and then after the URL you need to have a comma, and then after the comma you need to have the words that the user will see. And our words here are sign out. Because if the equipment is in, then we want to sign out. Then we have a comma here because then we're going to have what if it's not in. So in our case, that would be what if it says out. Well, if it doesn't say in, then you're going to have, again, the hyperlink, which is the URL code, and then a comma, and then you're going to have this word, sign in. So we want to now sign in because it's out. So this if here is going to basically test, is it in or is it out? And if it's in or if it's out, we're going to change one thing. We're going to change the words, sign in or sign out. So sign out if it's already in, and sign in if it's already out. Besides that, everything is staying the same. We're going to go ahead and link to the form, just as we've studied in other cases. Go to the form, and we're going to pre-fill the form with some information here. What information are we going to pre-fill? We're going to be looking for the C4 information, and we're going to be looking for the D4 information. What is C and D? C is the number of the equipment, and D is the description of the equipment. So these two pieces of information we want to send into the form so the user does not have to type it in and maybe get it wrong. Let's go ahead and look at the form we have again. Remember, we have a form here, and we do need to know what's the equipment you're signing in or what's the equipment you're signing out. We need to know if you're going to check it in or if you're going to check it out. Here's the equipment number, and here's the equipment name. Now we could use a drop-down menu, but then how are we going to set up the drop-down menu? We have so much equipment, it's going to be very troublesome to keep that up, and the menu would become very long. This way is much easier. The user just clicks sign out, and the equipment number and name will automatically be filled in. Now let's review how we do that. So we have our form ready, and now we want to find out how can we pre-fill it. We come up to the menu here, and there's an option to get pre-filled link. Now we have all of the form here just like normal, and we can pretend we're filling it out, and then we're going to get a pre-filled link. But the way I do it is I just try to put some indicators here to remind me, to let me see inside the long code string we're going to get, where are the pieces I care about. So for example, input equipment number, here I'm going to type AAA. And here for input equipment name, I'm going to type BBB. Okay, now number, I cannot use AA because we said it must be a number. So I'm going to say 111. Okay, that works. Then we go all the way down. I'm going to skip the rest. I'm not going to do them. And we're going to say get link. And then we're going to copy link. here is the link that I got from the Google form. You can see it's a little bit long and complicated, but it's not that hard. The beginning part is just the HTTPS URL link. And then we see that it's part of a form. And then here we have the very long, all the way down here, all the way to here. What is this here? This is the ID of this form. And that ID, remember, we want to save some trouble. We don't want to type such a long one or make our code look so long and complicated. Actually, I'm going to take this long number here, which ends in J3HA, and I'm going to place it inside of our user interface in the key page. And you can see I put it right here, equipment booking form. And you can see at the end it says 9J3HA, which is what we came up with. 9J3HA. Yes, that's the same long number. So this is on the key tab at B3. Okay, so remember that because we're going to change that in a second and use that instead of the long number. Then we have the specific parts here. So if you look here, look, there's 111 and there's BBB. So these are the inputs I put in there. So these are the two questions we want to be filled out. The equipment number and the equipment name or description. So this bit here gets put into the hyperlink over here. And you can see it's exactly the same. HTTPS, we have it inside quotation marks, so quotation here. Docs, Google, Com, Forms, DE. But then here, instead of using the ID, I reference the key tab B3, and I use the $sign, because I don't want it to change. It must be B3, and it's in the key tab, and I use the exclamation point to address the key tab. So key tab is here, and B3 is right over here. So grab this. Remember, we close the parentheses and then we use ampersand, which basically means to add it together. Ampersand, and then we begin with the quotation marks again. And then we come over to the rest of it here. Then we get to the end here where we have another quotation mark. Why? Because we're going to add the answer, the number we want. So we're going to use C4. But here we're going to write it a little bit different. It's not an absolute. We want it to be $C because we don't want C to change. There's going to be $C4. But then we're going to be going all the way down to C. Because remember, this is an array. We only want to write this formula once. So it's going to go all the way down one by one and do each one in the C column. So it's going to be $C4 to C. And what's it going to get at C? Well, if we come over here, we can see what you're going to get at C is going to be the equipment number. So each one of these is going to grab the corresponding number. So this link here is going to grab this number, and then this link is going to grab this number, and this link is going to grab this number, and this link is going to grab that number. Each one is going to grab the number that is right across from it in the same row, because we began the array at the same place, which is we began up at the 4. C4. And remember, our array over here began at E4. So if we change this number to be 5 or 6, it wouldn't be lined up. That would be wrong. So we're going to grab the equipment number, and then we're also going to grab D4. What's D? D is the equipment description or the equipment name. So we're going to put those inside of the link to the form. So that these two questions, and the questions have these numbers, and we know that because Google gave it to us, right? Right here, Google gave us, this is the question related to the number, and this is the question related to the name, description. And I put 111 in there, but now I'm going to replace 111 with C. And so it's going to become the C column. And this one here is going to BBB. It's going to be replaced with the D column. So now it's going to become D. So if we move our mouse over here, we can see we have the array formula and we do it twice. Why is it so long? Well, because one is for sign in and one is for sign out. Don't forget, right? And the first one is it signed in or is it signed out? That's the if test. And we're just doing the same thing twice. So this little comma here separates the true from the false. We just go ahead and do it again. And the only thing we're changing is the text on the page. It's going to say sign in or it's going to say sign out. Now we go ahead and we do that. And the great thing about the array formula is we only need to write it once. It's going to copy all by itself. If I click down here, you will not see a formula. You'll only see the resulting words. In fact, if I type something here, let me go ahead and type something like test. That's going to cause an error. Because now this error here says that I want to write an array. You told me to go all the way down to the bottom, but I can't go to the bottom because something's in my way. What's in my way? This word here, this test is in my way. If I remove this test, this word, you can see that, oh, now it works. So we don't need to pull this down. We do not need to pull this down. We just write it at the top. However, over here, we did a query with an import range. We don't need to pull this down because it's an array. If we move down here, you can see this is the result of the array. We don't need any formula here. If we come over to our import range here, which has two columns, comes out, we get this piece of information here. We have our code here, but not here and not here because we don't need it. It's an array. It's bringing it all the way down. Now we didn't write array because we're going to import a range. So it's almost the same as the array. We're importing a range. We're grabbing that whole piece from the other database and bringing it in. An array, on the other hand, is actually maybe creating data or making something, making a formula, testing something, whereas an import range just brings it in. Now we are using a query and we're selecting only the things that are good inside of the equipment list. So we're not going to list everything. So that's really handy. We only need to write that there. However, if we come over to our E column, in the E column, we're also importing an array, a range. We're importing a range right here. And we're using a query. And so the question becomes, well, what about here? How come I need to pull this formula down? You need to pull this down. And when you pull it down, some parts of it change, specifically C4. So example, C4 will become C5. And then C6, you see right up here. It becomes C6. And then if you go down one more, it becomes C7. And also right here, the same thing. C7. If you come down one, it'll be C8. So each row has the formula. We've pulled it down. Now, why do we have to do that? And that's because when you're using the query with the import range, if you have a test involved, then it will not work in the array. A query can work for a range, and it's just going to grab the whole range from top to bottom. But a query like this is not going to work to bring it all the way down. And the reason is because each row needs to be tested. Does it match? Does it match the requirement we have? Whereas over here, the import range, we're just asking it to grab everything down there as long as it matches this one requirement, good. We're not changing the requirement, it's just one requirement, good. However, over here, the requirement is changing each time, right? It's changing because it's based on the number of the equipment number, right? It's based on C4 and then C5 and then C6. So you cannot write that formula just once. It needs to be written every time differently. So up here, we write it once, and then we can drag it down. We can pull it down. And as long as our C here is C4 and not $4, because $4 would not change. It would always stay 4. But if it's $C4, the C will stay the same, but the 4 will change. When you pull it down, you drag it down, it'll become 5, and then 6, and then 7, and then 8, etc. So that's the difference. It's a little bit tricky. Now, you could go ahead and write code for every line. You don't have to keep it just at the top with an array. You could do it every line, but that's very tedious and it increases your chance to make a mistake. But sometimes you have to. So if you have some kind of conditional test in your query and it changes, you need to have it every line. Here in the photo, for example, we have it in every line because we want to show that photo only. And we're testing it based on what's the number. So each time it's going to change. So we went ahead and we did it each line. But it's pretty easy. You just write it once and then you drag it down and Google will adjust that automatically for you. So I think that basically covers the equipment sign out.